I still remember the sound of the front door closing that evening. It was soft, not angry, not rushed, just final. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time my son came home. He had his bag over his shoulder, his keys in one hand, and that look in his eyes, the kind that says, "I've already made up my mind." He said he was just going to stay with a friend for a while. Needed some space. I nodded, trying to smile, pretending to understand. But when the door clicked shut, something inside me knew things wouldn't be the same again. The house felt different after that, quieter, heavier, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from absence. His room still smelled like him. The faint mix of aftershave and detergent, and that little trace of cologne he started wearing after college. For weeks, I'd walk past his door and pause. Sometimes I'd open it, just a little, as if the air inside could still hold a piece of him. I told myself he'd call, that it was just a phase. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and silence grew louder than any words we'd ever shared. I wasn't sure when exactly things began to drift between us. Maybe it was when he moved to the city, or when he met that girl who didn't quite like coming over. Maybe it was when I gave advice when I should have just listened. You never realize how fragile love can feel, even between a mother and her child, until one day it stretches too thin to hold. Still, I waited. Every evening I'd sit by the kitchen window, pretending to read the newspaper, keeping an ear out for a familiar knock. The porch light stayed on longer than it needed to, and though I never said it out loud, I whispered a quiet prayer every night, that he was safe, that he was happy, and that one day he'd come home again. Sometimes forgiveness begins long before the apology ever comes, and sometimes love means waiting in silence. Until the silence becomes peace. Ethan was my only child. He was born on a cool spring morning, the kind where sunlight slips through the curtains like a blessing. I remember holding him for the first time, tiny fingers, sleepy eyes, and thinking, I'll never be alone again. It's funny how sure we can be of forever in those early moments. I used to hum to him while folding his baby clothes, imagining the kind of man he'd grow up to be, and when he did, when he grew tall and strong and quiet like his father, I thought I had done something right. His father, Mark, passed away when Ethan was just 15. It was sudden, a heart attack on a Tuesday morning. One moment we were eating breakfast together, the next, the world tilted and never straightened again. Ethan didn't cry much. He just stared at the floor during the funeral, his jaw tight, his eyes far away. Afterward, he stopped talking as much. He buried himself in schoolwork, in basketball, in anything that kept him moving. I tried to reach him. I'd make his favorite meals, grilled cheese and tomato soup, but he'd just eat in silence. He'd say, "I'm fine, Mom," and disappear into his room with his headphones on. Sometimes I'd hear him laughing softly at something on his computer, and my heart would ease just a little. But he never really opened up again. When he left for college, I told him how proud I was. He hugged me, quick, almost awkward, and said, "You'll be okay, right?" I laughed and said, "Of course I will." But when his bus pulled away, I stood there waving long after it was gone. The kind of wave that keeps pretending someone can still see you. College changed him. He came home less often. When he did, it was like having a guest instead of my son. He'd tell stories about the city, about his friends, his job at the cafe near campus. He sounded happy, just different. He stopped leaving his laundry for me to do. He cooked his own meals, brought his own groceries, even corrected me once when I offered advice. I remember one evening vividly. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. The TV was on, some news about a storm out west, but neither of us was really watching. He said, "Mom, you don't have to wait up for me anymore when I go out." "I'm not a kid," I smiled, trying to sound casual. "I know, sweetheart. I just like knowing you're home safe." He sighed, a small sound, and looked away. That sigh stayed with me long after he went back to the city. When he got his first real job after college, I was so proud I could have shouted it to the world. He sent me a photo of himself in a button-down shirt, standing in front of his office building. I saved that photo on my phone, printed it, framed it, and set it on the mantel. When neighbors came by, I'd point to it like a treasure. "That's my Ethan," I'd say. But over time, the calls became shorter. At first, he'd call every Sunday. Then every other week. Eventually, I was the one calling. And sometimes, he didn't pick up. I told myself he was busy, that he was building a life, that it was normal for children to drift a little. But deep down, I missed him. Not just his voice, but the way he used to fill the house with life. There's a special kind of quiet that only a mother's home knows. The quiet after her child leaves. It's not peaceful. It's not restful. It's the quiet that makes you talk to the walls sometimes just to hear a sound. I started keeping myself busy. I joined the church choir again. I took up baking, even tried yoga once, though I spent most of the time trying not to laugh at myself. But no matter what I did, everything came back to him. Every birthday, every holiday. Every time I saw someone his age at the grocery store buying snacks, I used to pack for him. When he told me he had a girlfriend, I was genuinely happy for him. Her name was Rachel. He said she was kind, smart, a little shy. I remember asking if he'd bring her home sometime. He said, "Maybe, Mom, we'll see." But he never did. Months passed, and though I tried not to ask too many questions, I could feel him pulling away. The tone of his voice on the phone changed. Polite, careful. Sometimes, I'd hang up and feel like I'd just spoken to a stranger wearing my son's voice. One night, after dinner, I sat by the window, phone in my hand, staring at our last text conversation. I had sent him a photo of the garden, the roses blooming early that year. He replied with just 2 words, "Looks nice." I read those words over and over, trying to find the warmth I used to feel in his messages, but it wasn't there anymore. And that's when I started to understand, distance doesn't always come all at once. Sometimes it grows quietly, like a shadow at sunset, and by the time you notice how long it's become, it's already too late to stop it. I don't remember the last time Ethan called me just to talk. At first, it was easy to make excuses for him. He was busy. I told myself, work, friends, his new apartment, maybe even Rachel. That's how life goes, right? Kids grow up, they find their own rhythm, and mothers learn to step aside. But stepping aside, it's harder than it sounds. Every instinct in me wanted to stay close, to ask if he was eating well, if he had someone to talk to when the days got hard, if he ever missed the smell of home. But every time I tried to start those conversations, I'd stop halfway through typing the words. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to bother him. There's this quiet fear that creeps into a mother's heart, the fear of being too much, too protective, too emotional, too attached. So I started holding back. I sent fewer texts. I waited longer between calls, and he didn't seem to notice. One Sunday afternoon, I decided to surprise him. I baked his favorite apple pie, packed it carefully, and drove 2 hours to the city. The traffic was awful, but I didn't care. The thought of seeing his face when I showed up made it worth it. When I reached his building, I stood outside, holding that pie like it was something precious. The doorman asked, "Are you here to see someone?" I smiled. "Yes, my son, Ethan Miller. Apartment 6B. He nodded and picked up the phone to buzz him. I waited, heart beating a little faster with each passing second, but Ethan didn't answer. The doorman tried again. Still nothing. I told him I could wait. Maybe Ethan was napping or had gone for groceries, so I sat in the small lobby, pie on my lap, watching people come and go. An hour passed. Then, too, I sent a text. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm outside your building. Thought I'd surprise you with some pie." No reply. By the 3rd hour, the pie had cooled completely. I finally left it with the doorman, asked him to give it to Ethan when he came home. As I drove back, the city lights blurred through the windshield. I told myself not to cry. Maybe he hadn't seen the text. Maybe his phone had died. There were 1,000 reasonable explanations, but deep down, I felt something break quietly, like a thread snapping in the dark. The next morning, I woke up to a message, just one. "Hey, Mom. Sorry, I was out with friends last night. Thanks for the pie. No heart emoji. No love you, just that. polite, distant. I stared at it for a long time before replying, "I'm glad you liked it, sweetheart." Then I set the phone down and went outside to water the garden. The roses were wilting a little that week. As the months passed, the silence became a pattern I didn't know how to break. He stopped coming home for holidays. At Thanksgiving, I cooked enough for two and set the table like I always did. 2 plates, 2 glasses, 2 folded napkins. I lit the candle in the middle of the table and sat waiting, though I knew he wouldn't walk through the door. I whispered grace out loud, even though it was just me, and took a quiet bite of turkey that tasted like nothing. The neighbors asked about him sometimes. "Is Ethan still in the city?" I'd smile and say, "Oh yes, doing great, busy as ever." And they'd nod, satisfied with the small talk, not knowing that the sound of his name still made my chest ache. I tried writing him letters, not to send, just to write, to feel like I was still talking to him somehow. I'd start with, "Dear Ethan, I miss you. I hope you're eating well." Then I'd stop, unsure what else to say. What do you write to someone who doesn't write back? I kept his old room just the way it was, the trophies on the shelf, the faded posters, even the blanket he used in high school, the one he said he'd outgrown. Sometimes I'd sit on the edge of his bed, close my eyes and imagine him there again, headphones on, tapping his pencil against the desk, humming softly to some song only he could hear. One evening, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was Rachel. Her voice was soft, kind, but cautious. "Hi, Mrs. Miller, I hope I'm not calling too late." "Not at all," I said quickly. "It's so nice to finally hear from you." There was a pause. Then she said, "I just wanted to let you know. Ethan and I are getting married next spring." For a moment, everything went quiet. I felt both joy and something else, a hollow space I couldn't quite name. "That's wonderful news," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm so happy for you both." She thanked me, told me they'd send an invitation soon, and that was that. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the clock on the wall. He hadn't told me himself. I only knew because she did. That night, I took out an old photo album, the one with pictures of his childhood birthdays. In one of them, he's 6 years old, frosting on his nose, smiling at me like I'm his whole world. I touched that photo and whispered, "You promised you'd never forget me." I didn't mean it as blame. It was more like a wish, a small, broken wish sent into the quiet of the house. The wedding came and went. I was there, sitting in the 3rd row, hands folded in my lap. He looked so handsome in his suit, standing beside her with that proud, nervous smile. When he spotted me before the ceremony, he gave me a quick wave, polite but distant, and I smiled back, pretending it was enough. During the reception, I sat at a table with some of his friends. They were kind, but I felt invisible, like a guest who didn't quite belong. I watched him dance, laugh, pose for pictures. There were moments when he looked happy, and that made me happy too. But when the night ended and everyone began saying goodbye, he hugged me gently and said, "Thank you for coming." "Mom," I wanted to tell him 100 things, how proud I was, how much I missed him, how I still kept his room ready just in case. But all I said was, "Of course, sweetheart, always." That was the last time I saw him for over a year. The months after the wedding felt like walking through a fog. Not sad exactly, just empty. The kind of emptiness you don't notice right away. It settles slowly, like dust on forgotten furniture. At first, I thought maybe things would return to normal, that he'd call after the honeymoon, maybe invite me over for dinner, or ask for my lasagna recipe like he used to. But weeks became months, and the phone stayed silent. I'd wake up every morning and check my messages before I even got out of bed. Nothing. Sometimes I'd send a small text, just checking in. "Hope you're doing okay." He'd reply hours later with, "All good. Mom, hope you're well too." And that would be it. No conversation, no warmth, just polite distance. There's a kind of pain that doesn't make noise, It doesn't come with tears or shouting. It just sits quietly in your chest. Heavy. Unmoving. That's what it felt like. One day, I drove to the grocery store and saw a mother shopping with her grown son. He was helping her reach something from the top shelf, and she laughed as he teased her for being short. It was such a simple thing, an ordinary moment. But I froze there for a second, my hand resting on a can of soup, watching them like I was looking through a window into a life I used to have. When the woman turned and caught my eye, she smiled politely. I smiled back, but inside, I felt my throat tighten. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after dinner. The dishes were washed, the lights dimmed, the clock ticking softly on the wall. I took out my phone and opened Ethan's contact. His picture popped up, the same one he'd used for years. He looked so young there, wearing that college sweatshirt, his hair messy, his grin wide. I almost called him. My finger hovered over the button for a long time, but then I imagined him answering, sounding distracted, saying, "Hey, Mom, can I call you back later?" And I couldn't bear that. So I set the phone down and whispered to the empty room, "I'll wait until he wants to talk." And I did. For weeks, then months. The following spring, I got sick for a while. Just the flu. Nothing serious. Still lying in bed with a fever. I found myself wishing he would call. I wanted to hear his voice, even just to ask how I was doing. But he didn't know. I hadn't told him. Some part of me still believed it wasn't fair to burden him with my loneliness. When I got better, I decided to visit the old park where he used to play as a kid. It was early evening, the air warm and golden, the sound of children's laughter echoing across the grass. I sat on the same bench I used to sit on when he was little, watching him chase after a soccer ball. Back then, he'd always run back to me, sweaty and smiling, asking if I saw his goal. Now all I could do was imagine it. As the sun went down, I whispered softly, "You grew up so fast, sweetheart." A breeze brushed my hair, and for a fleeting second, it felt like an answer. That summer, I finally got a message from him, short and rushed. "Hey, Mom, Rachel and I are moving to Seattle. Got a new job there." I read it 3 times before I could even breathe. Seattle! That was almost 2,000 miles away. I typed back, "That's wonderful, honey. I'm proud of you." Then, after a pause, I added, "Will you be coming by before you go?" He didn't reply for 2 days. When he did, it was just, "Not sure yet." "Things are a bit crazy." I didn't push. I didn't ask for more. I just sent a heart emoji and left it at that. He never came by. I found out they'd left when I saw a photo of them posted online, smiling at the airport, luggage beside them, the caption reading, "New Beginnings." My breath caught when I saw it. I wanted to be happy for him. I was happy for him. But under that joy, there was something else, something small and sharp, not anger, not even sadness, just the quiet realization that my son had built a life that didn't have space for me anymore. I didn't tell anyone how it felt. When neighbors asked, I smiled and said, "Oh yes, he's doing great. Got a new job, big move, big dreams." They'd nod and say how proud I must be, and I was. But pride and pain can live in the same heart. They sit side by side, pretending not to notice each other. One evening, while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old letter, the one he wrote me before leaving for college. The paper had yellowed a bit at the edges. It said, "Mom, you're my best friend. I'll always call, I promise." I traced those words with my finger. For a long time I sat there, reading that letter over and over. It was written by a boy who meant every word he wrote. A boy who didn't know how time changes people, or how distance changes love. I couldn't blame him for that. I just missed him. A year passed, 2 birthdays, 2 Christmases, 1 Mother's Day. Each one quieter than the last. Sometimes I thought of reaching out to Rachel instead, but something stopped me. Pride, maybe, or fear of being told they were busy. Then one afternoon, I got a call. It was Rachel's number. My heart raced as I answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Mrs. Miller," she said softly. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "Of course not," I said quickly. Is everything all right? Oh, yes. I just wanted to let you know that Ethan got promoted. He's been working so hard. That's wonderful, I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. She paused for a moment, then added, he wanted me to say thank you for everything you did for him growing up. That sentence broke something in me, gently, like a thread snapping after holding too much weight, because it sounded like something you say about someone. Not to them. I thanked her, wished them both well, and hung up. Then I sat in the kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. For the first time in years, I cried, not loud, not desperate, just quiet. Tears that slipped down my cheeks while the kettle hummed in the background. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't even about being forgotten. It was the grief of realizing that love doesn't always stay the same, that sometimes it grows in different directions, even when your heart stays rooted in place. That night, I went to Ethan's old room. The moonlight spilled softly across the bed, touching the trophies, the old desk, the little marks on the wall where he'd measured his height as a kid. I sat there for a long time, whispering things he'd never hear. I forgive you. I love you. And I'll always be here. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel angry, just tired, but peaceful, like I'd finally accepted that love doesn't need to be returned to still be real. Time doesn't stop, even when your heart wants it to. The seasons changed. The trees outside my window turned green again, then gold, then bare. And I realized one morning, as I sat sipping coffee, that I had stopped counting. The days since Ethan's last call, not because I didn't care anymore, but because I had finally learned that waiting wasn't the same as living. Started taking morning walks around the neighborhood. Something I hadn't done in years. There's a little trail behind the community garden that winds along a small creek. It's quiet. There, peaceful. Some mornings, I'd bring a thermos of tea and sit on the bench overlooking the water. At first, I went there to think about Ethan, to wonder if he ever thought of me too. But slowly, those thoughts became lighter. They didn't sting the same way. I started noticing other things, the sound of birds, the smell of wet earth, the laughter of children biking past. Life was still happening, even when my heart had been standing still. One afternoon, a young mother sat beside me on the bench. Her little boy was playing nearby, collecting pebbles and showing them off proudly. She smiled at me and said, "They grow up so fast, don't they?" I nodded, my throat tightening just a little. "Yes," I said softly, "faster than we expect." For a moment, we just sat there, two mothers from different times in their lives, sharing the same quiet understanding. Before she left, she looked at me and said, "You remind me of my mom." She always watched me like that, with that same look in her eyes. I smiled. "It's love," I said. "That look never goes away." As she walked off, I realized something simple but profound. Love doesn't stop at distance. It stays, quietly reshaping itself into memories, prayers, and hopes whispered into the wind. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I cooked Ethan's favorite meal, spaghetti with garlic bread and a little side of roasted corn. I set the table for two. Even though I was alone, I poured myself a small glass of wine, and before taking the first bite, I whispered, "Here's to you, my boy, wherever you are." It felt strange at first, almost silly, but halfway through the meal, I caught myself smiling because in that moment, it felt like he was there, not in the room, but in the warmth of my heart. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Seattle. The handwriting was familiar. Though a little neater than I remembered, I opened it carefully. Inside was a short note. "Mom, I'm sorry it's been so long. I know I should have called more. Life got busy, and I didn't realize how much time had passed. I think about you often, especially when I make that garlic bread you used to make. Rachel says I should write more, so here I am. I love you, Mom. I hope you're doing okay. Love, Ethan." I read it twice, then 3 times. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt warm, like sunlight after a long winter. That night, I wrote him back. I told him I was proud of him, that I'd always believed he'd find his way, and at the very end I wrote, "I love you too, sweetheart. Don't worry about the years we lost. What matters is that we're here now." After that, we started exchanging letters every few months, sometimes a call, sometimes just a photo of his dog or their garden. Nothing big, nothing dramatic, just quiet, steady reconnection. And that was enough. I didn't need constant phone calls or weekly visits, just knowing he was happy, alive, and thinking of me sometimes. That was peace. The years kept moving forward. My hair turned silver. The house grew quieter, but also gentler, like it had accepted the rhythm of my solitude. Every now and then, I'd take out the box of memories, his drawings, his old letters, the graduation photo, and instead of tears, I found myself smiling. Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's a slow, quiet decision you make every day to let love win over pain. And I think, in my own way, that's what I did. Last spring, Ethan came home for the first time in nearly 7 years. He walked through the door holding a bouquet of yellow tulips, my favorite. When I saw him, I didn't cry, I just smiled, and he did too. "Hey, Mom," he said softly. "Hey, sweetheart," I replied, and then I hugged him, really hugged him, feeling the weight of all the silent years melt away. We sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, talking about simple things, his job, the rain, the neighbor's cat that still visits my porch. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. It was quiet, warm, real. And when he left that night, he kissed my cheek and said, "I'll call you soon." This time, I believed him. Now, whenever my phone rings, I don't wait with dread or longing. I just smile, no matter who it is, because I know that love, the real kind, always finds its way back home, even if it takes a long road to get there. And in the quiet of my evenings, when the light falls gently through the curtains, I whisper a little prayer of thanks, not just for Ethan, but for the lessons life has given me. That silence doesn't mean the end. That love can survive distance. And that forgiveness, quiet, patient, unconditional forgiveness, is the bridge that always leads you back to peace. Perfect. Here's the brainy ending section, final reflection. Written in the same calm, heartfelt tone, this is where the mother's voice becomes soft, reflective, and filled with quiet wisdom. The kind of ending that lingers with the listener long after the story fades out. Sometimes, when I sit by the window in the evenings, I think about how much we all change, not just in the way we look or the things we do, but in how we love, how we forgive, how we understand each other. When Ethan stopped calling, I thought it meant the love between us had disappeared, but now I see it differently. Love doesn't vanish. It just hides for a while, waiting for the right moment to be seen again. The silence that once felt like punishment has become something else. A teacher. It taught me patience. It taught me to listen, even when there were no words. And most of all, it taught me that letting go isn't the same as giving up. I used to fill my days with worry, wondering if he'd forgotten me, if I'd failed as a mother, if he'd built a life that no longer had room for me. But now I understand that children don't leave to escape love. They leave to find themselves, and sometimes they have to walk far away before they realize the path that led them there began in your arms. So I stopped measuring my worth by the number of phone calls or visits. Instead, I found peace in knowing that I had loved him well, that I had given him roots strong enough to stand and wings brave enough to fly. One evening, I was watching the sunset through the kitchen window. The sky was a soft orange, fading into blue, and I thought, this is what forgiveness feels like. Not loud, not sudden, just a gentle light, spreading quietly until the shadows don't seem so heavy anymore. Forgiveness didn't erase the years apart, but it softened them, made them part of a story I could hold without pain. Sometimes, I imagine that every parent and child, somewhere out there, are walking toward each other, even if it takes a lifetime. Because no matter how far love travels, it remembers the way home. Now when Ethan calls, we don't talk about the past much. We talk about his work, the weather, his little dog that won't stop chewing his shoes. And that's enough, because the sound of his voice, calm, steady, full of life, is everything I once prayed for. He always ends the call the same way. Love you, Mom. And I smile every single time, because I know he means it, not out of habit, but from a heart that found its way back. To anyone listening tonight, who might be waiting for someone's call, I want you to know, you're not alone. Sometimes silence feels endless, but silence can also be sacred, a quiet space where love grows in new, unexpected ways. Hold on to kindness, keep your heart open, and when the time is right, forgiveness will meet you halfway, because love doesn't fade. It just changes its form. And sometimes, when we least expect it, it comes home again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, hold someone a little closer tonight, and remember, love never leaves. It simply waits quietly to be found again.